Hello and welcome to episode 177 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we have some good but really not so good news in terms of maps coming to Black Ops 6. And then, of course, most of this show will be covering the final major of the 2025 CDL season. Major 4 is coming up this weekend, so we will do our preview show, give our predictions for the first round, give our predictions for who we believe will win the final major and become the Major 4 MVP. But before we do any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm all right. Pretty mixed like last hour for New York sports fans, at least, with the Yankees winning on a walk-off, followed by a pretty wild end to the Knicks game there. But yeah, like you said, we one of our favorite episodes of the Ego Chall podcast on a regular basis is these preview shows. So I'm really excited to dive right in and like you said, this is the final major of the 2025 season. So a lot of implications for some of those teams at the bottom that aren't already secured in champs. Obviously, only the top 8 teams in CDL points will make it to champs, and this is their uh, last chance for anybody to get CDL points. So um, should be a really interesting event. It is a DreamHack event, and it's a 3-day event, unlike some of the other events this year. So some different stuff going on this time, but hopefully, end of the day, we get to watch some good Call of Duty over the next couple days.
Before we dive into the final major preview, we had some stuff with. We don't cover these sorts of things too much. We might mention it, but you said before we went on the air that you wanted to talk about this specifically. So, Call of Duty announced earlier today that Season 4 of Black Ops 6 and Warzone will launch next Thursday, May 29th. And in that season, 3 maps will be added at the beginning of the season: Shutdown, Fugitive, and Blitz. Blitz being a 2v2 map, as well as a 6v6. And then in season, 2 maps will be added: Eclipse and Fringe. So those other maps, really nothing, but Fringe obviously was a very popular competitive map in Black Ops 3. Certainly one of my favorite maps, and I think it would work pretty well for competitive in this title as well. But since it is an in-season edition, and even if it was a beginning of the season edition, it likely would not make its way into the competitive rule set in the rotation before champs, which is in about a month. What do you think about this? The fact that we did get Hacienda to come in to the rotation this season, so we did get one of them. We did. The maps have actually changed quite a bit this season, but what do you think about Fringe in particular, kind of being left until late May to be put in the game?
Yeah, I think I could rant for a while on this. I'm gonna try to keep it as concise as I can, but um, this is just another example, really, of something we've talked about over the years on this podcast of uh, just the non attention to detail for the competitive scene, or the fact that COD is casual first and competitive always comes after that. However you want to phrase it, um, I think if you had to ask most people in who actually are playing the game at a high level, I feel like it's pretty safe to say that the best map in this game, most people would say, is Hacienda, and it's a recurring theme. Not only because in recent titles the new maps that are freshly added from each game just aren't up to par with some of the other maps and stuff, but you even look at like Cold War when Raid was in, Express was in for Search and Destroy. Even last year, I guess last year it's a little different in that extent because some of the new maps like Six Star and Vista were some of the more entertaining maps to watch in last season. But um, just historically speaking, at least in the CDL era, some of the best maps have been remakes or remastered versions of legacy maps from legacy COD titles, and it felt like for a large part of this year, after Hacienda was actually implemented, that the map pool still needed some changes, and we got like Rewind coming back in. You could argue it should have never left, but that's besides the point at this point now. Um, but just you know and to play devil's advocate too, I said this with Hacienda because Hacienda was a Black Ops 4 map. When that was used in comp, it was a 5v5 map, so there was no guarantee Hacienda would work very well in this style game, 4v4 with a different different movement mechanics and stuff like that. You can say the same thing about Fringe. It's was a Black Ops 3 map, so jetpack movement, but it is one of those classic 3-lane maps, and control wasn't in Black Ops 3, so there's no guarantee that control would have worked on Fringe, but you can pretty much safely say that it would have been a really strong addition for hardpoint and search at the bare minimum, and I think you can make the argument it would have been able to be successfully implemented for control as well. So I just think it really, it, it it's it just sucks, plain and simple, that it's coming at a point where it just can't actually be implemented into the competitive season for this year. Um, I shouldn't say can't. It technically could be added for EWC, I guess. I'm just, realistically speaking, if it comes out mid season and that mid season update is at any point in June, there's no way they're gonna add it to the champs map pool when it hasn't been in all season, and it would only be available for like a week max, or whatever it would be. So just realistically speaking, the timeline doesn't work for it to be added to champs even if they wanted to. Um, so technically they could add it for EWC. That would be interesting, and I would personally like to see that. It would there's probably plenty of players who are competing, and due to the monetary value on Esports World Cup, um, they probably wouldn't want a new map thrown into the mix with limited time to practice on it and whatnot. But then again, I just think it would have been a really good map to work well in this game. And I'm frustrated that it's being added to the game at a time where it can't realistically have its time to shine on in the pro cycle or just competitive. I guess it could maybe be used in the challenger scene too. We talked in recently about like how challengers and pros have been on different patches for a while now, so I guess there is a possibility there, but for the most part, it seems like just based on when it's being released and being added to the game, we most likely won't see this map utilized, and I just think it's a wasted opportunity. Um, I did see some people saying that maybe this is like a trial to add it to the game, see how it works without like the jetpack movement and stuff, and then maybe it can be brought back for a consecutive year for next year's title. I mean, I'm not gonna totally rule that out, but that just seems like, even with maps like Raid and stuff, I feel like they haven't brought it back in. They haven't brought the same map back in consecutive years. I don't think. Um, could be wrong on that, but I can't really think of one off the top of my head where that's actually happened. So just overall, this was, I would have been really excited if this news happened a couple months ago and we got to see, even if it was like at the midway point of the season, and we got to just see the last couple months of this map being revisited at the highest level. I think it would have worked very well for this game. So end of the day, pretty disappointing news, but another example of competitive COD getting the short end of the stick in terms of its you know how significant it is in the eyes of the wider Call of Duty scene, I guess.
It seems like this is just a continuation of the old Call of Duty habit of developers taking away things and then adding them back in at a later point and saying, "Look at this new addition we made." Again, maps aren't, you know, the maps aren't like apples to apples in this case, because sometimes it'll be like, all right, we took away this movement, or we took away this like feature that everybody loves, and then they take it away and then they bring it back like 2 or 3 seasons later, or 2 or 3 years later, and then it's kind of like, all right, aren't you guys so glad that we finally did this? With maps, it feels like there's just no I think just personally feels like devs have kind of lost their creative luster really with these maps, because I don't even think it's a nostalgia thing anymore. I literally think that the the maps that were in Black Ops 2 and Black Ops 1 and previously, like those maps were just better than the maps that we're getting nowadays. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if there is some kind of creative stifling going on at like Treyarch or IW or Sledgehammer or whoever. Like I don't know if there is some kind of reason for that, or if it's just become, this thing where there's just not much of an incentive to make great memorable maps anymore. And I didn't even think in Black Ops 3 that a lot of those maps were like super awesome, but then you get to Black Ops 4 and Black Ops 5 and Black Ops 6 and you're like, yeah, those maps are actually pretty good. And I think that just shows how far we've got kind of gone away from how strong maps used to be. Black Ops 2, I think, had like the best maps in total, because even the maps that essentially got moved out of the rotation by the end of that year, I think those maps were really good. Like Meltdown was not like a perfect map by any means, but it certainly was unique and it had like very memorable moments on that map. But yeah, I think it is a shame. It feels like this is just something that happens with Call of Duty. I don't know if this happens in other esports, in particular. I don't know if Counter-Strike and Halo deal with these things nearly as often as Call of Duty does. Probably not, because of the annual cycle of these releases. But what you were saying about like, maybe this wouldn't have been good on Control, or maybe this wouldn't have been good in this game mode or that game mode. The problem is, like, we didn't even get an option. We didn't even get a chance
Yep.
to see how viable it was in these game modes. And I think that is the biggest travesty in all of this, is that we need more maps. It is not necessarily like we don't like it is a thing, we don't have enough good maps, right? But we also don't have enough maps. We don't have enough maps in terms of the competitive rule set, that it really would make sense to limit, the maps that we've already seen work competitively in the past. And that is another problem. With the EWC thing, like you were saying, maybe it does come into the rotation after the CDL season, but before EWC. No disrespect to EWC, but that doesn't really matter. Like, I mean, it matters in the sense of like it's a lot of money, and I'm sure there will be a lot of hype for it. But really, what matters is the CDL season, and that's champs. That's everything before champs. To me, it is kind of like, it's nice to have it for EWC if that is the case, if that is something that actually happens. But at the end of the day, like, it's about the Call of Duty League. That is the first and foremost importance in Call of Duty esports. So whatever happens at EWC is kind of irrelevant to what we should be doing in the CDL. And maybe that'll change if the EWC becomes an official part of the CDL, or there's some kind of partnership or something. But
I'm pretty sure it is now.
yeah, but I think, to me, I'm cool with maps coming in between events. I'm like, I said it a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, about how seasons should be lining up with the splits in the CDL, because there are 6 seasons in a Call of Duty game. If you have 4 or 5 majors, you could have these seasons kind of pop up like a week before the major qualifiers begin, and that will give teams time to kind of get used to what's happening in the game and what changes are made to the weapons, what maps are coming in or coming out. So I think that is something that should happen. But I mean, it does feel like, the fact that it is like a mid-season thing is also kind of just annoying, because I don't know, it just feels like a carrot is being dangled of like, oh, you got to wait, 4 weeks or whatever it is to play this map that you played literally like almost a decade ago. I'm not a fan of that at all.
I had that exact conversation with Tremor earlier today, just in DM, and he's like, it's kind of annoying that it makes sense, but at the same time, it is kind of annoying that from a business perspective, they're obviously gonna put the newer maps up front because that's what's gonna get. I don't know. They put the old maps for the reloaded update because it's gonna get people's attention and give them a reason to play those like the not quote unquote new.
Yeah.
The new season update has the allure. It's a new season. People are more likely to tune into a new season update than a mid season or the reloaded patch.
Yeah.
So by putting a nostalgic match in the reloaded patch, it gives people more of an incentive to come to the game, similar to what a new season is supposed to do. Um, it doesn't mean that it doesn't make it any less frustrating, you know.
Yeah, and what you were saying about the EWC is like maybe it comes in for that. It's like that is, I'm not saying you're wrong by any means, but that shows how far we've come where it's like, I mean, at the very least that's what, that's something they might do. And it's like that shouldn't be something that we even consider, to be honest. I don't think it should be um the fact that we're thinking, well, they might do it after the official CDL season is over and then before EWC, like that should not be a consideration. This should have been like one of like the first few seasons. That should have been a map coming in. Like that should have been, if you're going to put Hacienda in one season, put Fringe in the other. And then there's or personally, stop taking out maps. You guys don't have enough good maps at the beginning of the game, so how about you just keep the maps in that you had before, like in previous years? Like it makes no sense. I've dealt with that for multiple years. Like I don't understand that point of view of like, well, we have 16 to 18 maps at launch. Yeah, and half of them are dog shit. Like they just don't work. They are horrible. And they continually roll these things out. And it's like, well, not even from a competitive standpoint, but from like if you're playing pubs, you're like, I'm not gonna play that map. That map sucks. I am not going. Like I will exit out of this lobby. I will dashboard. I will do whatever it takes not to play that map. If you put Fringe in, you put Hacienda in at the beginning of the game, there might be less of that. There might be people that will stick around and play those maps. I don't know if it is people getting like in their feelings about it, like, oh, well, we don't want to put too many of the old maps in that might overshadow the new maps. Make better maps. That is the only solution here. Make better maps in 2025 and 2026. Make better maps so we're not clamoring for Fringe or Hacienda or you to make another Raid remake or Standoff or whatever map you want to pull out of your butt. Like, it just make better maps, and then we don't have these conversations. We don't even think about these old maps in old Black Ops games. And, I think it would just be nice if we had options. And I mean, that goes back to our long COD mobile argument, is like they have all these old maps and it doesn't feel like they're being limited. It feels like they get everything, basically, all of the best maps, all of the best guns, and then competitive gets whatever Treyarch or IW or Sledgehammer decides to put in a game in a given year. And we're just in a really bad spot. It doesn't make the game any more fun. It doesn't help anybody. It just, I guess, creates this kind of tension between the community and the developers. But, I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit more. Anything else on this stuff before we move on?
Just a good way to cap it off, I think, is I saw somebody retweeted earlier today, and I don't I didn't save the link or anything, so I'm not sure what account it was actually on, but somebody tweeted the Killa clip of Killa watching Illy like boost across the entire middle of Fringe without touching the ground, and that's still one of my favorite clips from Fringe that at least comes to mind instantly when I think of that map. So shout out Killa, shout out Illy, and shout out whoever shared that clip on the timeline today. Is a nice thing to see, given the negative thoughts I had after hearing the news of Fringe being added to the game, but possibly not being usable for pro play.
We need more Sloss clips on Twitter in general. I think he is the one of the greatest characters in Call of Duty history, and it's a shame that really for fans that came after like 2017, maybe, I don't know exactly when he would have kind of been on, like, black, not a pun or whatever.
Really AW.
Yeah. So I was thinking like he's kind of on the fringes, no pun intended, of like Call of Duty for, almost a decade now, because he was really, obviously, Black Ops 2 being his best game, and then Ghost was kind of like, he was all right. I don't know if he was on like any big teams really. Maybe OpTic Nation. I saw that clip not too long ago where it's Puckett or it's either Puckett or Maven interviewing Killa and TP, and
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah. That's AW.
that is just like a crazy clip. Like Killa is just he's crazy. Like there's just no player like really there's not a lot of like professional athletes like that where he is just so honest almost to a fault. And but yeah, like people don't even know. I think if you're a newer fan, you should go look up Killa stuff on YouTube. A great player in his time and part of like one of the first mainstream dynasties in Call of Duty.
So he did have that. He had that second place finish at the CWL NA Stage 2 playoffs with Dream Team DT. If you remember them,
Yes, I
the
do.
team was Killa, Diabolic, Sender, who's obviously still a coach, and Chino at the time, Money Cheen.
Mm-hmm.
That was a squad. I think that's really like his last like real notable placing. So that's 2016, but it's been roughly a decade since.
Yeah.
You know,
I feel like the
so
the last time that I would have really thought about Dream Team was Killa, and like I think it was actually Black Ops 3, and I'm pretty sure like Parasite joined the team for like one day, and then like him and Killa fought on stream that night, and then they broke up like the next morning or something like that. I somehow remember that. I don't know if how accurate that timeline is, but that's pretty much like the last thing I can really remember of Killa other than the clips I see on Twitter. But yeah, I'm sure we'll talk more about Killa at some point. Like we need to, show and tell one day and just bring our favorite Killa clips. I mean, we have to just
that'd be fun.
play the train clip, the choo choo train.
Yeah.
That's like off limits. We'll just play that at the beginning as like an icebreaker. But let's get into this major 4 of the 2025 Call of Duty League season, the final event of the regular season, the final event before champs next month. A really important tournament. Obviously, it's the last chance for teams to earn CDL points and to find a place at champs. We do have most of the teams in the league have either seen that they're not going to make champs. If you're Vegas or LAG, they have already been officially eliminated. And then we have a lot of the teams in those top 5 spots. They've already locked up. At least they don't have their seed necessarily, but they know that they're going to champs. And that regardless of what happens at Major 4, they have a spot at the World Championship event. We do have some teams still fighting for a spot, and I'm sure we'll talk about that as we move along. I want to start at the very top of the bracket, though. Miami versus Minnesota, the number 1 seed, Miami Heretics. They were the only team to go 5-0 in these most recent qualifiers. I mean, I think both of us are probably going to lean toward the Heretics. I mean, they've been
Yeah.
on fire basically since bringing in Super. But I pulled some stats out. I was looking on Breaking Point, so shout out breakingpoint.gg. They're the best place I can find for this kind of these kind of stats. But these two teams with these two rosters, so Miami, they brought in Super, I believe, in March, and then Minnesota brought in Kenny in April. So these two rosters have only met one time, and that was April 19th, and that was a 3-1 Miami Heretics win. And I think in general, you have to roll with Miami at this point because they have proven to be, since bringing in Super, I think the best search and destroy team in the game. Statistically, maybe it won't hold up if they play Atlanta FaZe or if they play LA Thieves, but right now they're winning 84% of their search and destroy maps, and I think that's probably going to be the biggest difference. Minnesota has lost, I would imagine, at least 3 or 4 game 5s with Kenny in this roster, and then if you can't even get to game 5, it might not even matter. So I'm going to roll with the Heretics. What do you think about this matchup?
Yeah, I think you got to pick Miami. Kind of was gassing them up last episode a decent bit. I just really love what Super's added to the roster. Brought it up a couple times how this tournament, if Miami is able to go on a magical run here and win this event um and Super gets MVP, it could help him in his case for Rookie of the Year despite not playing the whole season. Same thing goes for ROKKR too. I think he's already, you know, basically the only way he uh, doesn't get Rookie of the Year is if Miami wins the event and Super gets MVP, or if OpTic win the event and Mercules gets MVP of the event. I think outside of those two things happening, ROKKR's should have the best case for Rookie of the Year at this point, but getting a little ahead of myself with that. I think in general this is, it might be a no duh comment that I'm about to make here, but like this is as must win of a match as it gets for Minnesota. Like they don't win this match, it's, they are literally one loss away from
Mhm.
their champs dreams and effectively their season outside of Esports World Cup being over. So um it's not an easy task. It's you know, it's definitely not going to be easy because, like you said, they have the they've been getting to the round 11s and game fives and just haven't been clutching them out. Which means, like, if they're not doing that against teams that haven't been as strong as Search as Miami, I feel like it's going to be even more difficult for them. But the one saving grace, I guess you can say, is that my Minnesota has shown that ability to get to game fives all year, whether it was with Paul X in the roster or since having Kenny. I feel pretty confident that if there was a stat keeping track of which organization has played the most game fives this year, I feel safe saying it's Minnesota. Um, and they've done it in a variety of ways, whether it's forcing their way through with a reverse sweep, but you know, um, I just think it's a very difficult task for Minnesota given the way Miami has played of late. So yeah, I think you got to lean towards Miami here, but like I said, I mean, this is Minnesota's playing with literally all their entire champs aspirations and everything on the line. So maybe they have a little bit of extra fire coming in if they get off to a hot start in the hard point. Maybe that gives them some momentum. But then again, the way Miami's played in search, even if Minnesota like 100 point clubs map one, I still think I'm leaning towards Miami in the search, and then the series is tied. Anything can happen from there. So yeah, I think a lot is working against Minnesota here, but you know, the number one seed in these tournaments is 1 and 2 now in winners bracket round one. So maybe the one seed curse was removed after last event, or maybe it'll show up again here. Who knows?
The biggest thing will be the respawns. Obviously, like that is for any series. If the superior respawn team comes in, they probably can win 3 of those first 4 maps, and it doesn't even have to get to a game 5. And that's really probably what Minnesota is hoping for, because if you look at these two rosters with the lineups they have now, they're pretty comparable in the respawns. Miami has won 50% of their hard points and 50% of their controls, while Minnesota has won 44% of their hard points, 42% of their controls. So obviously not as good as Miami, but certainly not as great of a disparity as it is in search and destroy. Like I mentioned with the Heretics, they have won 84% of their search and destroy maps. I think they're something like 16-3 in search with Super in the lineup since he became full-time. While Minnesota with Kenny, and we've always thought of Kenny as like a pretty good S&D player, and trying to elevate this roster. It is their best game mode, but not by much. They've only won 44.4% of their searches with Kenny in this lineup, which is obviously not great, but it's their best game mode. It just probably is not going to be the path to victory for the Minnesota ROKKR here, so it's probably going to have to come through those respawns, and I think that is doable. Like if there is an upset path for Minnesota, it is taking hardpoint map 1, probably losing a map 2 in the search, and then trying to grind out map 3 and map 4, and not even hoping that it goes to a game 5 and that Miami, who's won all but 3 of their S&D maps. I think that's probably the path that Minnesota is probably going to want to take here. But when you were talking about is like how this is pretty much a must win for Minnesota, I wanted to illustrate that by pulling up the point standings. So OpTic right now is in 8th place, so they would get the final spot at champs if season ended today. They have 175 points. Minnesota is 40 points behind them in 9th place with 135 points. If Minnesota were to beat Miami in this first round matchup, that would earn the ROKKR 30 CDL points, because I think they would automatically be placed top six in this event, because they would completely avoid loser bracket round 1 and round 2. That would put them only 10 points behind OpTic, save for OpTic winning their first round matchup or whatever they would happen to do in the losers bracket. But that would give Minnesota some kind of life. Winning this match would put them only 10 points behind OpTic. OpTic has, a tough first round matchup. Even if OpTic drops down to the losers bracket, you're probably going to win their first round losers bracket match. But, we just saw OpTic lose to LAG not too long ago. They would play Carolina in the losers bracket. So there is some kind of hope, some kind of chance for Minnesota if they were able to win. If they don't win, then Minnesota drops down to the losers bracket. They played the Boston Breach in the first round. Boston has been, able to win on LAN against some really good teams. That would not be, I think, an easy match by any means. And then Minnesota probably plays the winner of LAT and Vancouver, or I guess the loser of that match, but they play the Falcons in the first round. So I would imagine it's going to be LAT or Vancouver in the second round, and that's just to get to where you would be had you won winners round 1. So it's going to be tough for Minnesota, but this match is huge, and I think we'll know pretty early in this tournament who's actually going to make champs and who is not, and it's probably going to come down to this. Next match, the one I just mentioned, LAT versus Vancouver. This is another one where it's certainly not as high stakes in terms of who's going to make champs, because both of these teams have already clinched a spot at champs. But it would go a long way for Vancouver's confidence, I'm sure, to finally be able to get a win against the Thieves. So far this season, with Neptune in the roster, despite being really close in some cases, Vancouver has not been able to beat LAT. The Thieves are 5-0 against the Surge with Neptune in the roster. A 17-5 map count. I believe there are 2 or 3 sweeps in there, which certainly drive that number up. And the last time that we saw these two teams play was at Major 3 in the Grand Finals. They actually met twice at Major 3, but in the Grand Finals, LAT swept Vancouver 4-0 and won the third major of the CDL season. I think we're both probably going to go with LAT, I imagine, but I am very interested to see, especially because we had that conversation on the last pod about should Vancouver be considered a part of that top 3 with LAT and FaZe. What do you think about this matchup?
Yeah, I was gonna bring up. Shout I think it was Chris in the Twitch chat last week who brought that up, and we had a pretty good conversation about that. So if you didn't catch last episode 176, you can go back and watch it. It was towards the uh, end of the show, so somewhere around like the last 30 minutes or so. Um, but yeah, I think, again, you pulled up these stats here showing LAT 5-0 versus Vancouver with Neptune and that 17-5 map count. I think we've had this conversation, maybe not necessarily, maybe we did talk about it with this matchup, but I know we've talked about it with some other matchups this year in general, where it's like one team has a dominant record. It was probably LAT versus Carolina that I'm thinking of.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea of, if you are struggling against a certain team already and you're losing consistently to them, what can you do to mix things up, or throw a wrench in there and try and throw a curveball, whatever idiom you want to use. Um, and I think, Vancouver with a coach like Rambo there, they have the, you know, the the backbone and that just the smarts to try and figure something out, where maybe we see like something different in the vetoes to try and throw a curveball in there and give them an advantage. And at the end of the day, like if it doesn't work, then it's just another loss to LAT that you already have and you've already struggled against them. So we'll have to wait and see when we actually see the vetoes and everything if that is something that happens here. But more likely than not, I mean, Vancouver thinks they are a good team and rightfully so, and LAT obviously do too. Um, I just think it's a tough matchup because I think both of these teams their strong suit is the respawn, and obviously LAT have had Vancouver's number in that department, and LAT is a really strong control team. So if Vancouver isn't able to capitalize on the hard points, then you know unless they win the search, you're looking at a 3-0 or a 3-1 if LAT takes care of business in the respawn. So it's a tough matchup, and this is a result of them both starting 0-2 in the qualifiers. That's why we're seeing this matchup, a rematch from the grand finals of last major in winners bracket round 1 here. So yeah, like you, I am picking LAT to win this one, but something that we always talk about in these preview shows, getting a little ahead of ourselves here. I think it goes without saying that the losers bracket for either of these teams, if Vancouver does beat Thieves, which I would consider an upset, especially just given the history between the two teams this season and where they are at right now. If either of these teams drop down to the loser bracket, they play Vegas Falcons. Um, I think that loser bracket like pathway is very favorable for a decent run for whichever team loses this match. So, I think it's going to be exciting that we get this match in the first round, but I do not think that whoever loses this match will necessarily be heading home with a top 12 finish.
One thing that could get overlooked in this matchup, because people probably look at the 5-0 match record, the 17-5 map count, and think, okay, LAT is just so far and away better than Vancouver. The maps that they have played, in many cases, do not indicate that. Just look at the last match that they played, which is obviously a 4-0 sweep in favor of LAT. It was 250 to 228, game 1, Hacienda Hardpoint. That's a really close map. Dealership S&D map 2 went to a round 11. LAT wins, and then that kind of turns the rest of the series. LAT just controls the rest of the way. The match before that, which I believe was the winners finals at Major 3, Vancouver actually goes up 2-0. They win 250 to 219 on Hacienda Hardpoint, a map that they later lost in the grand finals to LAT. 6-1 S&D win on Dealership, and then they end up losing the series, get reverse swept. They lose 6-4 in Game 5, rewind S&D. Even if you go back even further than that into March, you look at they get swept by LAT. What happens? They lose another round 11 S&D. They lose a round 5 control. You go back even further than that, and when they played in the minor grand finals, and if you remember, that goes to Game 7. LAT ends up winning 4-3. The difference really is another round 11 win for LAT. They win Vault S&D in map 2. They're able to win 2-3, 6-7. Vancouver had a chance to close it out on Hacienda Control and Skyline S&D and wasn't able to do so. So I think there is some credence to the fact that Vancouver does appear to be able to beat LAT, if everything goes right. And obviously LAT is not going to make it easy on them, but I did want to bring that up because I do believe that Vancouver is a part of that top 3, and rightfully so. It's just going to come down if they're able to execute in those big moments. If they're going to be able to, not lose another round 11, that would probably help go a long way for Vancouver in potentially winning this major, which would then legitimize them, I think, even further in the community. And I think people would respect what's been going on with Vancouver even more if they're able to get over that hump and break out of this kind of Silver Surfer mode that they're in and be able to win a major before we get to champs. Next up, Atlanta versus C9. I mean, I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'm not going to pick against Atlanta. Despite the most recent result, between these two teams. The only time that they have met with these rosters, obviously, Atlanta has not changed their roster, and C9 did before the Major 4 qualifiers. C9 beat FaZe in that matchup 3-1 on May 9th, so it'll be about 2 weeks difference once we get to LAN. I just can't pick against FaZe. Obviously, they won the first two majors of the season. C9 has been notoriously up and down this year, and I just really can't bring myself to, even with that one result, we've seen Atlanta not perform up to standard online, but more times than not this season, even with Major 3 being a disappointing result for them, they're still one of, if not the best team in the game, and I'm not going to pick against them.
Yeah, I'm not gonna pick against them either. But I definitely think it is interesting just how the qualifiers played out before
Mm-hmm.
uh, this major, where Atlanta has that tough uh, week one schedule of the qualifiers against Vancouver and LA Thieves, and they win both matches to start 2-0, and then they lose to Cloud9 New York to start the following week 3-1. Um, I would have loved to be in a position here where Atlanta still goes 4-1 in these qualifiers, but especially given their wins over Vancouver and LA Thieves, um, it's a totally different conversation. If Atlanta beats Cloud9 there, they're 5-0, beat the top two teams, like they're heading in to this tournament as looking like the favorites again in my eyes, if that's the case. Um, but the Cloud9 loss, I don't think it necessarily means like Atlanta's getting top 12. I'm not saying that, but it makes you think a little bit about is there something here where um just matchup wise this new team did something to catch Atlanta off guard, or just something with bringing two challengers players into the mix, did that uh shake things up or whatever. I don't have a good answer for how you know Cloud9 was able to pull out that upset, but it's definitely worth mentioning, and similar to the Miami Minnesota match we talked about earlier. This is another must win for Cloud9, just because they're 10 points behind uh, Minnesota, and if I'm pretty sure I did the math uh, last episode, because they're at 125, and you get 100 points if you win the event. So they basically have to win the event and hope Boston and OpTic get top 12 finishes to have a realistic chance at making champs. And I think so. Second is 75, I believe it should be here.
Yes.
Second 75. So 75 only gets them 200. They'd be tied with Boston then if Boston gets a top 12 finish. So that's why like winning the event literally is like their only guaranteed way of getting a champ spot. But yeah, like saying I know what I just said is saying in quotes, the only realistic way for Cloud9 to make champs is winning the event. That's like kind of like feels like an oxymoron saying it out loud, but mathematically speaking, that's what it's going to take it if they want to get there. And there've been flashes in the brief time where we've seen this new Capsule and Spark Cloud9 roster where they've shown some real potential and signs of life. So I don't want to totally rule them out. And this is, if you're in Cloud9's position, looking at the possible draws you could have in the first round here, they probably got to feel a little confident, knowing they're playing against a team that they beat, even if it is a team as good as FaZe. But I still got to give FaZe the benefit of the doubt, and think they're gonna, come out swinging here to start this last event. Before champs, and just rehashing what we talked about at the end of last episode too. Atlanta's 10 points behind LA Thieves right now for the CDL points regular season title, and Atlanta has never finished a CDL season without being in first place in terms of CDL points. So big event for them if they want to keep that streak alive. I don't think, if you ask the players, they probably don't really care about that too much, but um, narrative wise and fan wise, it is something to keep an eye on because it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to bring up. So LAT 10 points ahead, 440 to 430 over FaZe. There's third and fourth place. Those teams, Toronto and Vancouver, those teams are separated by 10 points. Vancouver is at 330. Toronto 10 points ahead at 340. So there could be some movement there. It seems like there could be movement between 5 through 7. Miami is at 235. They're 15 points ahead of sixth place Carolina, who are 20 points ahead of Boston. Even 25 points behind them is OpTic. And what I wanted to bring up with C9 is you were saying that they pretty much have the only realistic chance is like first or second. The only chance, like they have to get at least third. There is no other option. So if they bow out fourth place and we say, well, how great of an event that was, it's for pretty much nothing because they will not be able to make champs. They have to get at least 50 CDL points, and the fewest that they could get while still jumping OpTic would be 60, which is third place. 45 points is awarded to fourth place. So obviously they have to get top 3, which seems kind of like impossible for C9, even if we believe they can make a run. But we did see, I guess in Major 1, Miami make that run, and they weren't expected to. And it really, for a lot of these teams that aren't thought to be top 3, top 4, even top 5, you're just kind of hoping that FaZe, Toronto, Vancouver, LAT, they kind of cannibalize themselves and they basically eliminate each other in the early rounds, so you don't have to go through all of these tough teams to get, third or fourth place. But we'll see what happens. Obviously, that's going to be a really big storyline to follow, and if C9 isn't able to win this matchup against FaZe, and FaZe has not, they got knocked out or they got knocked down to the losers bracket in round 1 against Vancouver last time around at Major 3. Maybe they come in slow or kind of lethargic like they did against C9 in the online qualifiers, and we could see another upset happen. That's certainly something to watch out for. I did want to bring up the stat real quick though, because Atlanta this season has been one of the best teams in general, but Hardpoint has technically been their worst game mode. They have a 61.4% win percentage in Hardpoint, which is crazy because some teams don't even have that in their best game mode. But that is their worst compared to 68% in S&D, 69% in Control. And C9 with this roster, obviously a far smaller sample size than what we are dealing with Atlanta. Atlanta's played 41 matches this season. C9 with this roster have played 5 all online. That being said, though, C9 has a better win percentage in Hardpoint than FaZe. C9 has won 63% of their hard points with this team. Granted, they've been really, really bad in S&D, only won 20% of their searches, and then they've won 40% of their controls. So if there is a path, it does seem like we'll know kind of map 1. Like if C9 comes out, they win map 1, they take a 1-0 lead. That's something to kind of maybe get excited about if you're rooting for an upset here between C9 and Atlanta. And then the final winners bracket round 1 match is a match we literally just saw this past weekend. It was one of the final online qualifiers, one of the final online matches this season. OpTic versus the Toronto Ultra. Coming into that match, especially what happened earlier in the weekend with OpTic losing to LAG, I think a lot of people expected, Toronto will win this match, even with Toronto kind of, I think, coming in flat. I believe did they play Vancouver first or did they play OpTic first, Toronto, this past weekend? Do you remember?
OpTic was at the end.
All right, so they come in and they lose to Vancouver. Even with that result, I feel like people were probably thinking that Toronto is going to be OpTic because OpTic just had this just unfathomable loss to literally one of the worst teams in CDL history, and the exact opposite happens. Mercules has a great performance. OpTic have another 3-0 win, their second win with Mercules in the lineup, and I think that really makes this decision a lot harder than it would have been. If OpTic loses that series, regardless of if it's even a 3-2 round 11, I think people are very easily going to roll with the Ultra and think that OpTic is OpTic and they're just kind of still a step behind these top teams. Now that they won that, they get 3-2 record in the Major 4 qualifiers. Toronto ends on a really sour note in the Major 4 qualifiers where they start 3-0. They have a chance to get that number 1 seed to finish the regular season on an undefeated streak, and then they lose back-to-back matches in the final week. I'm still going to go with the Toronto Ultra. I understand why anybody would pick against the Ultra right now, and especially because we didn't even get to see Beans at the last major, so it's been a while, and I don't know if the visa issue is fixed or anything, but if Beans is in the lineup, because Mercules is not an option, of course, as a replacement now, I'm gonna go with the Ultra. But where are you leaning now that we just saw this matchup online a few days ago?
Could you imagine Beans faces visa issues again for this event, and Toronto picks up Skies to play against OpTic?
I like it.
The
They should do
the
that.
absolute, and then if Toronto somehow won with Skies, oh my god, the green wall would be in shambles. That just hit me. Oh wow, I am tired, but yeah. In all seriousness, you picked Toronto, less than a week ago for this matchup online. I picked OpTic for this last matchup online, so you're picking Toronto again here. I gotta stick with OpTic here. Just saw them win, so I'm not gonna switch it up. But I do think this is, it makes sense. This is the match really that we differ on in terms of pick 'em for the winners bracket, because it is the one that I feel like it could go either way. Um, I know we've made the case for some of these other matchups, but um, realistically speaking, I said it last episode, like factoring in the OpTic losses to Boston and LAG, if OpTic was playing literally any other team but the Toronto team they just beat, I really don't know if I'm picking against or with the Green Wall. So, I just this is going to be a case of I just saw it, so got to believe that they're going to do what it takes to try and repeat that success. But I feel like Toronto, I want to say that Toronto's been a better team on land this year, but I feel like that might statistically not be true just because they had that strong start in the Major 1 qualifiers, and they didn't do as well at Major 1, and then they had a couple hiccups in the online qualifiers for Major 3. So um, I don't know statistically what is actually accurate, but like vibes wise and gut feeling, I do think Toronto is a better team on land. Um, so I do think this should be the most interesting first round matchup in terms of realistically having a chance to go either way. If you wanted to make the case for LAT Vancouver, I wouldn't hold it against you, but LAT is undefeated against them, so it makes it a little harder for me to pick that over this one. But I am excited for this matchup. Excited to see, it is technically not a OpTic home major, but it is another event in Texas. So, people could be saying the OpTic home cheese or whatever they were saying at Champs last year and stuff. First chance for Mercules to play on land with the OpTic Green Wall fandom buff. So a lot of things to look forward to here if you're a Green Wall supporter, and I do think this should be a good matchup either way.
Toronto is a much better land team than OpTic, at least to this point.
Well, yeah.
Is that what you were comparing them? Or
No, I was thinking like Toronto online versus Toronto on land.
Gotcha. I mean,
obviously, OpTics had the
yeah.
3 top 8 finishes on land, and I think Toronto came in 6th at Major 1, and that's probably their worst placing. So, like, even their worst placing of the year is better than OpTic.
I think
on land.
For Toronto, I think the worst qualifier set was probably this time around, because obviously there were only 5 matches and they ended up, I think, losing 2 of them. So like if I'm not mistaken, but yeah, like they've been pretty consistent, except Major 1 was kind of their big letdown. But yeah, they're a pretty tough team to beat. We didn't, like I said, we didn't get to see Beans and how that team, like the team that we expected to see. We didn't get to see how they would perform at Major 3. I think there's an argument to be made that they would have performed better. That being said, Mercury's kind of played out of his mind. He played really well, so like it feels like maybe that was about the same or maybe a little bit better than what they would have done, but they have a chance to kind of prove that, and especially against Mercury's, against OpTic, this is a really big matchup for OpTic, especially too, because we talked about the factors that could go into either C9 or more realistically Minnesota jumping into 8th place and knocking OpTic out of champs contention. If OpTic wins just this match, they get 30 CDL points, which would put them at 205 points. It would put them 70 points ahead of Minnesota, 80 points ahead of C9. It would pretty much lock it up. Like, it wouldn't secure it 100%, but for C9 to get over them, they'd have to win the event. For Minnesota to get over them, they would have to get second or first. Like, that just puts a lot of pressure on two teams that have not proven to be that caliber of team. So a win here would, all but confirm a spot at champs, which would be huge for OpTic, and it potentially could get them out of the 8th seed and push them into the 7th seed, depending on what happens to the Boston Breach in the losers bracket. And more importantly, OpTic does have a path to getting out of the bottom 2 seeds in general. They could get into 6th if things break right for them, because Carolina is at risk of not earning any CDL points at this event. Same with Boston. Those 6th and 7th teams are kind of within striking distance for OpTic, because if OpTic were to get 3rd place, which is obviously a huge jump, a huge leap for this team, it would still, I think even then they could get a top, they could get 4th and tie Carolina for 7th place. I don't know what the tiebreaker would be in that case. I don't know if it's like a head-to-head or how that works, but I mean, that would be huge for them, because we've talked about it, I think, last week. The reward for OpTic qualifying for champs right now is playing LAT. If LAT were to stay in 1st place and OpTic stays in 8th place, even if OpTic gets up to 7th place and they leapfrog Boston, they likely would play FaZe or potentially LAT if LAT drops down to 2nd place. So getting into 6th via tiebreaker would be a huge boost for OpTic, and would probably give the Green Wall a lot more confidence going into champs. But obviously we need to probably slow our roll a little bit and take one step at a time, because OpTic has not been consistent by any means on land this season. I did want to bring up, though, because you said it on the last episode, and you said something to the effect of like which OpTic will show up, and I think that is probably the biggest question we have right now. Like, Toronto in many cases has been relatively consistent on land and online. They've had some kind of slip ups, but in general, I think we've kind of determined that they are like a top 5 team at worst this season. With OpTic, it has literally been, at times, they look like a true championship contender. We have to remember, in the Major 1 qualifiers, they were the number 1 seed. They beat Toronto to get the 1 seed. And then basically since that moment, they have been complete and utter chaos for the rest of the year. And right now we're on this alternating win-loss right now for OpTic, because if you look back, they have, since Major 3, they lost to Boston, then they beat Vegas, then they lost to Atlanta, and they've won, lost, won, lost, won. So they have not strung together more than 1 win or 1 loss in that time period. And if they don't show up like we saw in the Major 4 qualifiers, right? Because they lost to the Boston Breach, which is not the craziest thing in the world considering how Boston has played at times, but then they lost to LAG this past weekend. And in the interim, they've beaten Carolina and Toronto, and before that, they beat Vancouver in Skies' last game, which just seemed like a ridiculous thing to happen. I don't know what that says about OpTic, if it says anything at all, but I just think we have to keep in mind that regardless of how high of potential or high of a ceiling OpTic seems to have with Mercury's, and I think we would both agree that it seems higher quite a bit probably than when they had Skies, their floor is still rather kind of mysterious. Like, you don't know how low it can go, and you don't know if it will kind of fall out at the last minute, and especially against a really good team like Toronto, if they're able to put enough pressure on OpTic to kind of make the floor fall out for them. So I think that'll be a really interesting storyline to follow as we move along at Major 4. Anything else on these winners bracket matches before we move on?
No, I think we can do losers now.
So the losers bracket, so the bottom 4 teams in the Major 4 qualifiers, of course, start in the losers bracket. It's essentially a single elimination tournament for these 4 teams: the Boston Breach, the Vegas Falcons, LAG, and the Carolina Royal Ravens. The Boston Breach, I think in general, have been able to kind of play spoiler for a lot of these matches throughout the season, just dating back from the very first match of the year when they beat OpTic Texas, the defending world champions, to upsetting LA Thieves in, I think that was Major 2, if I'm not mistaken, in the first round, LAT being the first seed going into that major. So I think of these 4 teams, Boston probably has the best chance to kind of make a run, considering we've actually seen of this specific roster their ability to kind of play spoiler. But what about Carolina? Is there any hope for Carolina, considering they probably, other than Vegas, have the toughest losers bracket matchup? Because right now, of course, Vegas plays the loser of Vancouver LAT. That is like a lose-lose situation for the Vegas Falcons. But Carolina, they play the loser of OpTic and Toronto. That would seem that's certainly better than Vancouver LAT. But is there any chance for Carolina to make any kind of progress, to get any sort of momentum going into champs with this new roster?
Um, is there a chance? I mean, sure there is. I just
Do you
don't see
see it
how.
happening?
No, I think the way I'm looking at it right now is I think of the 4 teams that are starting in the losers bracket, the most likely to win a match is Boston.
Yeah.
If Minnesota drops down, I still think I would pick Minnesota over Boston, but I would think that's like the most likely um team that starts in the losers bracket to be able to beat a team that drops down from the winners bracket. I mean, Carolina lost to OpTic recently. I can't remember if they played uh Toronto too in these last qualifiers or not, but um at least speaking
Yes, they did.
on they did. Okay. So that makes it even tougher for Carolina, but historically speaking here, and this is mostly not having to do with Carolina since they should be in champs, all things considered. But for teams like Vegas and LAG, they literally they have nothing to lose at this tournament. They're already mathematically eliminated from champs. And we have seen it historically with the curse of Nikki D starting at the end of Cold War there when FaZe were already like booked in for everything. I'm pretty sure they already had like the first seed locked up and everything, and then Nikki D dropped double digits in a game 5 search to uh, eliminate FaZe, and I'm pretty sure that might be their worst placing at a CDL event. It was 7th, 8th, so I think that's possible. Um, but regardless, that was Seattle's champs because they were already eliminated from
Yeah.
champs. So that major, the final major of the Cold War season, that was their last tournament. So they had nothing to lose, and they came out swinging, and then they made a little more money than they did at all the other events, I think. So teams like Vegas and LAG, they have nothing to lose, and that makes them dangerous matchups for some of these other teams. I still think the way the bracket plays out, if Surge drops down to play Vegas, Surge should beat Vegas, and then I would pick Surge over Boston or Minnesota, assuming that's the matchup. Even if it's Boston Miami, and then Miami beats Boston and it's Miami Surge, I might lean towards Vancouver. But end of the day, I think that top part of the losers bracket is where it is just like the most likely scenario where we see a team go on a losers bracket run. Um, but outside of that, yeah, I don't know. I think most of these teams that are starting in the loser bracket are unfortunately going to be looking at top 12 finishes here. The only positive in that is if it does happen for Boston and Carolina, their early work earlier on in the season in terms of CDL points should be enough to get them a champ spot, barring a just Herculean run by Minnesota or Cloud9.
Yeah, I actually think the lower part of the losers bracket is probably like right for the picking for a lot of these teams because Vancouver it feels like is just gonna dominate probably the upper part I would imagine, or LAT I guess. Like whoever loses that match feels like the overwhelming favorite of those four teams in losers round one and losers round two. Whereas in the bottom part, like you could talk yourself into, let's say OpTic loses against the Ultra, they drop down to play Carolina. C9 probably drops down to play LAG. Carolina, OpTic, LAG, and C9, those four teams have been so inconsistent, granted at different points of time and different lengths of time, but it's not a guarantee that OpTic, for example, would make a run through the losers bracket as a result of that. Same with like even Toronto, I think, because if Toronto loses to OpTic, I think that really puts them in a vulnerable place. I could see them potentially losing to Carolina. Probably not. They're probably much more favored to get out of round two and into the losers quarterfinals, but I don't know. Like it feels like it could be kind of a surprise run for one of these teams in that bottom portion. And we might look back and like, wow, how did they get, top four or how did they get top six? And it's really because there just weren't very many strong teams in the losers bracket. And I think this is kind of like what the CDL season is like encapsulated in is like the Boston Breach are there and they play spoiler at different points in time, and then there are kind of your usual suspects plus Carolina, who have basically bottomed out over the last 6 weeks of the season. And we're going to get OpTic or Toronto. We're going to get LAT or Vancouver, who are probably just going to slaughter these teams en route to at least the quarterfinals. But yeah, like this, I think the loser bracket is pretty kind of emblematic of what we've seen of the CDL season so far. I think it's probably going to be whoever wins or whoever loses LAT Vancouver. That's probably the team that's going to be in probably losers semis at least. I don't see many teams being able to slow them down. Maybe like if FaZe loses in winners semis, which I don't necessarily see either, but I could, we could see like a Vancouver versus FaZe losers semis, which or losers quarterfinals, which would be kind of sick to be honest. I know those teams would certainly bring their A game, and we get to see who kind of gets the final laugh before we get to champs. So, enough about the losers bracket though. Like, who do you think comes away with this? Because this is kind of an unusual path we've gotten here. Usually it's FaZe is like the number one seed, or I guess this season it's been FaZe is like a lower seed, but they seem to be kind of rounding into the team that we always thought they would be. It doesn't necessarily seem like that right now because they started off strong and then had a little bit of struggle. LA Thieves and Vancouver are the 4-5 seed in these qualifiers, so they don't have that top seed advantage. And then Miami, who do have at least one good major placing. I'm not sure if they're a true championship contender. So where are you leaning? Who wins Major Four in your view?
I am 3 for 3 so
Yes,
far
you
this
are.
year on picking major winners. So there's a lot of pressure on me here. I really want to do the fun thing and pick Miami, but I
I mean, hey, you gotta live. You gotta do it.
know. I think I got to go with LA Thieves. Um, Narrative wise, would give them back to back to head into champs. It would tie them with FaZe at both two championships, which would make champs the tiebreaker technically. Um, so I think that sets the stage for um, you know the most interesting narratives heading into champs. Like if FaZe wins and has three majors, then even another team winning champs, like there would still be the argument of who had a more successful season. I do think Miami winning would just be a really cool story for the organization, the whole the all Spanish roster. be the first time ever that they win a CDL event or a CWL event even. I just think I gotta go with Thieves. I do think, I want to pick FaZe too, just because I always pick FaZe, and FaZe did just beat Thieves. Um, but I do, I don't know. I think narrative wise, I'm gonna go with the Thieves for now.
And I'm, gonna stick to tradition because I think we have picked opposite. So if I picked FaZe, you
Yep.
picked LAT, and if you picked LAT, I picked FaZe. Since you picked LAT, I'm going to go with the Atlanta FaZe. I'm
Cool.
over 3 on major picks this year, which is pretty crazy because I'm one match ahead in the pick'em, and I think I've had like a pretty good sense of how these majors go, but the winners not so much. I'm going to go with FaZe for a lot of the reasons that you already explained. FaZe literally just beat LAT. What was that, last week in the
It was week
qualifiers,
one.
or week 1? So a few weeks ago now. We've only seen LAT beat FaZe one time this season. I think they've met 4 or 5 times. Yeah, so LAT is 1-4. The only win was December 8th. That was the second match of the season. I, since then we've seen FaZe and LAT play, of course, at that, the probably one of the best, if not the best, major grand finals of all time. The major one grand finals where FaZe won in game 7, and LAT was kind of, a nose hair away, you could say, from winning that event. But I think just in general, we've seen these two teams match up and Atlanta come out the better in almost all of them. I think in this losing streak right now for LAT versus Atlanta, LAT is 1-6 in search. And of course, your favorite saying on this show is
Yep.
S&D wins championships. And I don't know if you can really win championships if you can only win one of 7 S&D maps, especially in a best of 7 if it does come down to that. And it very well might. I could see these two teams linking up in not only the winners finals of this event, but also the grand finals, just like we saw with LAT and Vancouver in Major 3. So I'm going to go with FaZe, but I certainly, obviously, I'm not going to say that it's stupid to pick LAT, or if it's,
Yeah.
it's stupid to pick Vancouver. I would probably push back if you were to say Miami. I think, like, I'm just one of those people, like, I want to see it. I want to see if they're actually able to break into that group and beat
Sure.
LAT and FaZe and Vancouver, or like one of the 3 on land, before I kind of make some kind of proclamation. But I think any of the top 3 teams are realistic and understandable choices to win this event.
I'll just say I've said it the last few preview shows here since Major One, that I want to see another match between LA Thieves and FaZe on LAN. And after we got to see it twice in winners finals and grand finals of Major One, and it hasn't worked out the last 2 events. So um, no matter how it ends up, uh, what the end result is, I really hope we actually get to see them face off at this event. Especially, it'd be kind of like an LAT Atlanta sandwich if it happens at Major One and Major Four. It didn't happen at 2 and 3. I think it'd be a good way to set the stage for champs. But said the last 2 preview pods and it hasn't happened, so maybe the third time's a charm.
It's like a luxury meal. It's awesome to have, every now and then, but you're it's too expensive. You're not able to get it too much or too often, because like you said, we had it at Major 1. That was February 2nd that we saw those two teams play. We haven't seen them play again on land, and the only time we've seen them play at all was just a few weeks ago on May 4th. So there was more than 3 months separation between those two matches. And like I said, that grand finals was one of the greatest grand finals in Call of Duty history. And then we don't even get to see these two teams face each other at all online or on land for more than 3 months. And if they don't play at Major 4, then we're going to go on more than 4 months without another land meeting, because champs isn't for almost another month. So it's going to be a while if it doesn't have it happen at Major 4. But like you, I am hoping that it happens. I would love to see Vancouver and FaZe play again, because that's one of the most surprising rivalries we've seen this season, at least develop this season. I would love to, if we could get it, and this is a realistic chance, is to see OpTic versus FaZe in the winter semis, which seemed very far-fetched for a while because OpTic could not get out of its own way and figure out a way to even get to that point in the tournament. So yeah, if we could see FaZe versus OpTic and FaZe versus Vancouver, LAT versus FaZe, I think that could, maybe even an HBR Classic, if you will, LAT versus OpTic. I think it would be a lot of fun to see some of these matchups before we end the regular season right now. I do want to end on the note of the standings because I've mentioned them, but I want to make sure people have it in the back of their mind heading into this tournament, because obviously most of the top, I think all of the top 5 have clinched spots at champs, if I'm not mistaken. So the top 8 in the CDL standings will qualify for champs, and already the top 4 technically, because I guess Miami could, I guess, according to COD Gamepedia, and I'm going off of them, they say the top 4 have clinched spots at champs. Miami, who is in 5th with 235 points, they technically haven't, but it would be, I don't even know what the scenario would be for that to happen and them get knocked out, but I guess it could. But at number 1, the number 1 seed as of right now is the LA Thieves with 440 points. Number 2, Atlanta FaZe at 430. The Toronto Ultras in 3rd with 340 points. 10 points behind them is 4th place Vancouver Surge. 5th place is the Miami Heretics with 235 points. 6th place is the Carolina Royal Ravens with 220 points. They are 20 points ahead of 7th place Boston Breach. And in 8th place, the final team to make champs if the season had ended today, is OpTic Texas with 175 points. 9th place Minnesota ROKKR 135. 10th place C9 New York 125. And the 2 teams entering the final major officially eliminated from champs contention is the LAG Gorillas Mates. They have 40 CDL points in 11th place, and the Vegas Falcons have 20 points and are in dead last. So that is where we stand as we go into the final major of the year, and the regular season finale for the CDL season. It's been a pretty incredible year. We've had some really entertaining majors so far this season, and I hope that we can finish out on a really high note and get, hopefully, I would love to see Minnesota or C9 make a run just to kind of create that drama of who will be the final team. I always go back to, I think it was 2022 with New York and them making that run and it seeming impossible, but it turned out to be reality, them making champs at the last event. I think they knocked out like Florida and Minnesota in that event to leapfrog them to get to champs. So I would like to see, even if it ends up with OpTic qualifying, I would just want to see another run from one of those 2 teams and make it kind of a journey for either one of them. But yeah, that about does it for this week's show. Pick'em heading into the final major. You are 144 and 76. I'm 145 and 75. We will update you on the pick'em after this week. So we picked the first round matches, the winners round 1 matches, and then we'll privately over text message do the rest of the tournament as the weekend progresses. Quick reminder, the matches are, the schedule, I should say, is very different than what we've seen of the majors in the past, really the past few years, to be honest. This is compressed because it's being run at DreamHack. So instead of it being over 4 days and there only being 1 stream, it is over 3 days, starting on Friday, May 23rd, and finishing up on Sunday. On Friday, there will be 2 streams, the Alpha stream and the Bravo stream. Matches start at 1:30 p.m. Eastern, so you can kind of figure that out where you're located, what time zone that would be. But at 1:30 p.m. Eastern, the matches on Alpha and Bravo start. On Friday, there will be 5 total matches on Alpha, ending probably around, I would guess, like 8:30, 9:30. I mean, who knows with with dual streams. Like those matches used to go until like almost midnight. I don't know if the CDL is trying to get out of there super early, but it might be a long night. Bravo has matches until the final match starts at 6 p.m. Eastern. That's scheduled, of course. We'll see how that actually works. But, you know, maybe have multiple monitors, have one on your laptop, have one on your TV, something like that, if you plan on keeping up to date with everything happening this weekend for Major 4. So again, starts on Friday, May 23rd, runs through Sunday. If you're going to the event, please be safe. Please wash your hands. Stop getting people sick after these majors. Please, you know, be hygienic, I guess. That's a common complaint among CDL players and fans. So do your best to be safe and have fun. Cheer for my Boston Breach boys. They're going to need it to make that run to the grand finals. So yeah, that about does it for me. Make sure to subscribe, like, follow, however that works on your podcast feeds or on YouTube. I think we're at like 233 subscribers or something like that on YouTube. I can't remember exactly. But
It says
please,
230 now.
230. Maybe we lost 3. I don't know.
I was at 228 before the show, so
All right. Maybe I was dreaming, I guess. I don't know.
yeah, maybe.
But, you know, please subscribe on the YouTube channel. If you can, please like the videos, share as much as you can. If you have any constructive criticism, please let us know. I think we do want to hear from you guys. If you like parts of it, we can maybe expand upon that. If you don't like it, maybe we could eliminate it or kind of bring it down to a minimum so you enjoy more of the show. But please let us know what you think of the show, and maybe we could do a little bit better. Please follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, and the podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. You could follow the live stream at twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. The live stream is also live on the YouTube channel, and you can watch all those VODs back if you want. You can also follow Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/jbink with 2Ks. And then, yeah, we'll be probably back. We will not be back on Sunday because Bink will be out of town, so we're going to change the thing around. I think we'll probably be doing the show on Monday instead of Sunday, but we will be back early next week to talk about everything that happened at Major 4, who made it to Champs, who did not, all that good stuff. But please tune in then, and we'll... Bink has said those shows are his favorite, the post-major kind of recap, analysis, like reaction shows. So hopefully we can have a lot of fun with the final major before we move on to... I think Roster Mania probably starts right about then for at least the bottom 4 teams. As teams, I guess, get used to, maybe they're gearing up for EWC, but we're then going to gear towards starting to preview champs and get ready for the biggest event of the calendar year in Call of Duty esports. But yeah, I'm done yapping. I'm tired of talking. Bink, take it away.
Hey, you went for a while there, but yeah, really, you took the only thing I was gonna say was no show on Sunday. I'm going to Rhode Island. My cousin Austin's getting married, so shout out cousin Austin. Um, we should be back home Monday though to give you guys the usual recap show that we've been doing pretty frequently, at least this season, almost immediately after the event ends on Sunday. So a little bit of a longer wait, but you know, with the time gap between the end of Major 4 and the start of Champs, we should have a lot of time to go very in depth into anything wild that happens at Major 4. So I definitely am excited about um, the recap episode coming up and everything in the lead up to Champs and whatnot. So exciting time, best time of year for Call of Duty esports fans. Definitely like Preston said, whether we do actually get a Cinderella run from Minnesota or Cloud9 or not, I would just like to see something that at least makes that like hunt for the final champ spots interesting, even if like Preston said, OpTic does actually clinch the last spot. Like that's fine with me. I think that would be catastrophic for Coyote Sports if OpTic isn't at champs, just frankly. But I would just like to see it, like the race heat up and be as interesting as possible. Because if like Cloud9 and Minnesota both get eliminated on Friday, then that's out the window over the last 2 days. So, But yeah, enough yapping. I think. Thank you guys as always for all the support. Really excited for this event. Hope you guys are too, and hope you guys tune in on hopefully Monday when we're live with the recap of Major 4. So see you guys when we're live next. Thank you as always, and remember to send the chow.